Welcome to the first story time of the third year of this project. It certainly doesn't feel like we're going into the third year. It feels like, a few months ago that I did this for the first time. But thank you all for still being around and enjoying stories with us. So, today's topics. There are quite a lot. Old abandoned houses, desirable dwellings in undesirable locations. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Pizza topping arguments. When you feed the magpies and they never forget. When you put a temporary fix in your house that becomes normality. Coughing and sneezing fits. Beautiful but impractical. B&B stories. Obvious disguises. Inappropriate clothing. The Perils of Bottomless Bags Part 2. And again, Tsukumagami, the Spirits of Mundane Objects. So I have a little poem to start with, which is about kind of old objects and perhaps objects that have some kind of spirit attached to them. It's called Misremembered. The soft silent call of an old coffee pot, sitting high on a shelf, wise and willful. The creaking call of a rusty washing line. The scraping song of a winter tree against a grimy window pane. The hush of a crumbling stone, lost grain by grain in time. Old things seem to whisper, wonder, asking why they have been left and why they were made. Their stories locked inside a secret, guessed at and misheard and spread, over and over, found, interpreted and mislaid. Turn back all the pages to our story, which is called Pizza and Prejudice.
Red tea, yes.
Here's my tea. So we do all have tea or some equivalent.
Red tea.
Abbey was contemplating a more permanent solution for her light switch problem. The layout of her unit made fitting her furniture a bit like solving a three-dimensional puzzle. And try as she might, she could not find a better place for her bookcase than right in front of the light switch. As a result, it was necessary to reach into the small space behind the bookcase with a long, narrow object, such as a spatula or skewer, and use the improvised lever to turn the lights on and off in the living area. Abbey owned a wooden spoon, but it very rarely stirred any bowls of cake batter or pots of homemade fudge as she'd intended. Instead, the wooden spoon had become the light switch spoon and remained on top of the bookcase by the front door, carefully positioned with the handle sticking out just enough that she could find it when she came in the dark and had to grope around. One possible solution to the light switch problem was to somehow cut a hole in the bookcase of a suitable size and shape to reveal the light switch. Abbey was looking into this possibility by trying to sketch a pencil line around where the switch was at the back of the top shelf, without actually being able to see the switch. One of her dangly blue agate earrings tapped a scattery rhythm against the shelf as she turned her head on one side. Buzzed! Her phone vibrated vigorously on the next shelf down, and Abbey turned sharply and hit her head on the top of the bookcase. Somehow, Abbey fumed, a phone set to vibrate seemed to have far more mysterious powers in the field of making a person jump out of their skin than one set to maximum volume. Who was calling her at this time anyway? Abbey liked a good chat, but not after she'd finished dinner. This time of the evening was for tinkering with minor repairs, sewing buttons back on work shirts, looking crossly in the mirror at the fading blue tips on her hair, and curling up in a blanket with a book or a TV show about gardening. She picked the phone up. "Hey, it's Abbey." "Hi, it's Shen." Abbey grinned suddenly, surprised. "Oh, hi, what's up? You never do phone calls." She made her way to the couch. "Ned and I are planning a little adventure for next long weekend, and we wondered if you maybe wanted to come too," Shen said. Abbey paused. She'd stayed at Shen and Ned's house before, and she was having some difficulty picturing how their habits would translate to a holiday location. "What sort of adventure are we talking about?" she asked. "We found this little cottage on Airbnb, right out in the bush, with a wood oven for pizza. We were thinking we'd cook in the wood oven, sit around by the fire and disconnect for a bit, you know." Abbey contemplated. "Are you bringing Grease?" Grease was Shen and Ned's mischievous, sock-stealing goblin of a dog, and could certainly be trusted to make any trip eventful. "Probably. We can't seem to find anyone who's available to look after him." "I wonder why," thought Abbey. "Is he allowed at the Airbnb?" "Yeah," Shen replied. "That's one of the cool things about this place. It says you're welcome to bring pets along. Bess the chook is a bit under the weather, so we may bring her along too if we need to keep an eye on her." Abbey chuckled. "Any other additional guests?" "Oh, yes, actually. Our other friend Pan is also coming. You know, we used to live with her when we were in the share house way back." Abbey did know. She had met Pan once at a birthday tea, and the memory was very distinctive. "Have you thought about it?" Abbey asked. There was a pause on Shen's end. "It seemed like a good idea at the time," she said eventually. "I'm sure it will be fine." Somewhat against her better judgment, Abbey agreed to the trip. It would be nice to get out into the wild for a while, whatever the company. Abbey locked up and hopped into the passenger seat of Shen's rattly, dusty farm ute a week later, with a backpack of essentials and a shoulder bag full of potential pizza toppings. Slamming the door behind her, she raised a fine cloud of dust, which caused her to respond to Shen's cheerful greeting with a sneezing fit lasting several minutes. Shen turned the radio up and hummed along while she waited. By the time Abbey stopped sneezing, it didn't seem appropriate to say hello, given she'd already driven most of the way down the road. So instead she said, "I found the most surprising thing when I was packing." "Oh, really?" Shen's eyes sparkled, remaining carefully focused on the road ahead. "Yeah. Turns out the last time I used this backpack must have been when I had rental dramas and came to stay with you." Abbey held up a little handmade envelope, slightly stained with purplish fingerprints, which bled out into the paper like watercolour. She brought it close to the steering wheel so that Shen could see without turning away from the road. "Oh, wow!" Shen exclaimed. "I guess you never planted the seeds then." She gave Abbey a slightly reproachful glance that was softened by an amused crinkle around her mouth. Abbey sighed. "I pretty much forgot all about it in the midst of all the bureaucracy," she admitted. "It was so nice to rediscover it, though, so in a way I was glad. Perhaps you can help me to work out where to plant them and do it together someday." Shen nodded, smiling at the road. The next stop was Pan's place. Pan had a car with enough seats for everyone, unlike the ute, so she'd been lumped with driving. Pan emerged from the door of an oddly spindly-looking block of flats all painted in white, and ran around to the back car park with a surprising agility given that she was attired in heeled boots, a long layered skirt, and an incredibly floaty, complexly wrapped shawl. Pan knows this place is in the bush, right? Abbey remarked. Shen shrugged and nodded, pulling their bags out of the ute. Yeah, this is normal. Ned came striding up the road, huffing a bit on the hill, with Grease on a leash and Bess the chook sitting in a basket, her curious beak and beady yellow eyes peeking out from below a tartan blanket. Abbey and Bess eyed each other with sidelong glances. When the Airbnb host had said that pets were welcome, Abbey wasn't sure they would have had chickens in mind, but she kept her concerns to herself. Shen could be rather immovable on such matters. Pan reversed her car out onto the road, opened the boot and took out the parcel shelf to make room for Grease, who leapt in immediately and began to bark excitedly. Pan then produced a bag, which looked a bit like a handbag, only 3 times the size. She saw Abbey eyeing it and bellowed, "It's bigger on the inside!" over the sharp tones of Grease's enthusiasm. Abbey smiled weakly, the barking hurting her ears and the relevance of Pan's comment rather escaping her. Did Pan think that Abbey considered the bag too small? They all squeezed in, Bess the chicken on Ned's lap, Abbey's feet on her food bag, which smelt of rosemary, and Pan drumming fingers with long, newly manicured nails on the steering wheel to the elusive beat of the ambient electronic music her car began to play. Ned eyed Abbey's bulging shoulder bag. "Is that pizza stuff?" Abbey nodded. "What do you have?" Ned probed. "Fresh herbs, pumpkin, olives, ham, pineapple, different cheeses." She paused under the scornful glare that Ned was giving her. "What?" Ned waved his hands in expressive distress and nearly hit poor Bess, who looked more alarmed than usual. "Pumpkin does not go on pizza," he exploded. Pan turned around in the driver's seat, causing everyone to chorus, "Watch the road!" and scoffed. "What do you mean, Ned? The pumpkin's fine. It's the pineapple that's poison. Come on, everybody knows you don't put pineapple on pizza." Abbey shook her head in disbelief. "Did you bring toppings, Pan?" asked Shen, quickly from the front, evidently hoping this would encourage Pan to face forwards. "Yes." Pan slid pensively back down in her seat, smiling benignly, and zoomed around a corner. "Of course. I have sardines, baby spinach, barbecue sauce, beans, raisins, roast chicken, garlic." "Beans?" Shen repeated in disbelief. "Beans don't go on pizza." "Wait," Ned interjected. "Did anyone remember to bring dough ingredients or bases?" "Oh, shit." Shen did facepalm. "I was supposed to get those on the way to pick up Abbey, wasn't I?" "We can stop and grab some on the way," Ned replied, purposefully neglecting to confirm Shen's mistake. They detoured to the nearest supermarket and picked up yeast, some oil, and big bags of flour, which Pan managed to inhale some of, despite them being inside another bag and nowhere near her. While Pan was coughing violently, and Shen and Ned were trying to persuade her not to start driving until the coughing fit was over, Abbey popped some pre-made pizza bases into her food collection, just in case. Pan followed the instructions of her phone GPS out past the edges of town, through a short area full of fields of sheep like cotton wool blobs, and into narrow roads with dusty, gravelly edges. It began to spit with rain, and the others complained to themselves, but Abbey was beginning to look forward to the escape, She loved the smell that rose from the gravel and leaf litter as the rain hit them, and she'd already spotted several rare plants along the roadside. Pan had begun to focus better on the driving, aside from the panicked moment when Bess hopped out of her basket and did a poo in Pan's armrest console. On the whole, it had not been as bad a drive as Abbey had expected, considering the wide variety of personalities sharing the vehicle. Presently, however, Pan's phone made a bloopy sound, and the electronic voice said, "GPS signal lost." "Oh," Pan sighed, "I forgot that might happen out here. Do you know roughly where we need to turn off?" After a much more convoluted drive than they'd intended, the friends found themselves approaching a dirt road T-junction, surrounded by trees and grasses that all looked awfully similar. Shen leaned out the window and squinted at a sign which had been coated in a layer of mud by the wind and rain. "Oh yes, Oak Tree Road. This is it. It's on this road somewhere." "Which way?" asked Pan, slowing, but not stopping so that it was necessary to answer before she drove straight across into the scrub opposite. "Right," Shen answered hurriedly. "I think," she added, once the car was safely turned into open road and not a tree. A few misdirected kilometres and a U-turn later, a structure appeared ahead of them, nestled into a little cleared dip in the landscape. Gnarly shrubs clustered around, as though to hide it. "Is that it there?" Ned asked, leaning forward. "Surely not," Abbey said, peering around Pan's headrest. "That looks abandoned." A decorative wall on the side nearest to them was crumbling, and a blackberry bush was threatening to engulf it. Shen looked closely. "Oh," she said, "I think it actually might be. I can see the dome of a pizza oven." They pulled up to one side of the building, avoiding dips and blackberries. Ned got out, and Bess jumped out of the basket and caught a skink, shaking it vigorously. Grease was let out of the boot by virtue of jumping over the back seats, over Abbey, and out of her door when she opened it, and proceeded to greet the new place by peeing on one of the veranda poles. "How do we get in?" asked Pan, exploring cautiously around the side of the building, her boots precarious on the sloping ground. "I think there's supposed to be a lockbox thingy somewhere," Ned told her, peering up under the veranda. "I have the code written down in my bag." Abbey made a slow circuit of the little cottage. It must have been very beautiful, she thought, when the paint was new and the latticing on the veranda was intact. Why had they only left it to become this infrequently visited place, so little cared for and lonely? She couldn't see a lockbox. "Maybe you should ring the owner and check where the keys are," she prompted, emerging back around the other side. Ned nodded and continued pulling out everything in his bag, this time evidently in search of his phone. Actually, that might be a bit difficult," Pan interjected. "I don't think there's really any reception here at all." She tipped her phone back and forth and held it up to the sky, her new sparkly nails glinting in the mild sunshine. Ned produced his phone and began doing the same. Abbey started checking under loose bricks and plant pots. Eventually, Abbey located a single old-fashioned key, stowed inside a teapot with no lid, which was acting as a sort of vase for holding small gardening tools. She carefully slid it into the front door and turned it, and the door swung open. There was a little rush of air, as though the house was exhaling. It smelt musty and faintly of lavender. Pan backed away from the door, got the heel of her boot stuck between the slats of the veranda, and fell backwards into some blackberries, which made short work of the floaty shawl. "This place is haunted," she whispered as they disentangled her from the thorns. Then she looked down at her hand as Shen grasped it to help her up, and wailed, "Oh no!" One of the long, shiny, glitter-painted nails was askew and torn. Shen patted her on the shoulder a bit. "Never mind. Those are very beautiful, but really not the most practical for this sort of trip." Pan glared furiously, but she stayed quiet and hung close to Shen as they all went slowly and a little apprehensively into the building. A narrow hallway led almost from the front of the building to the back, with mysterious doorways on either side. Abbey turned the first door handle experimentally and found a rather cavernous broom closet containing an old-fashioned straw broom, one spare roll of toilet paper, an open box of clothes-washing powder, some moth-eaten towels, and a large redback spider. She closed the door again hurriedly. "Are you sure we haven't broken into someone's place?" she asked. Shen looked concerned. "Sorry, everyone," she said anxiously. "This seemed like a good idea at the time." "I don't think anyone's been here in quite a while," said Ned, making footprint patterns on the dusty floor to emphasize his point. "Except for spirits," murmured Pan, picking up an old straw hat from a hook on the hallway wall and turning it in her hands. "How many generations old do you think this is?" She put the hat into Abby's hands as though expecting her to be an expert on the matter. The straw felt silky and fine beneath Abby's fingers, and the ribbon wrapped around the crown section had faded to a generic brown and looked thin and fragile. Abbey shrugged. 3, maybe? "If it's a century or more, it could be a spirit," Pan declared quietly. Abbey frowned. She didn't think a hat was likely to contain a consciousness. "Tsukumagami," Ned said, nodding. "That's a much more convincing one than my socks, although I swear they move around on their own at night." "That's grease," Abbey scoffed. "I don't think I've heard of a hat Tsukumagami," Pan mused. "But this one has definitely been neglected, so it could be quite malevolent." Ned grabbed the hat and flapped the brim, floating it around to land on Pan's head and grab her by the eyebrows. Pan let out a shriek. Shen shook her head. "Honestly, stop misusing other people's folklore and come explore." The next door led them to a little kitchen, tiled with small patterned blue, green and white tiles all around, so that it felt rather like being underwater to stand in. "How beautiful," said Shen. On the counter was a microwave, which had a faded post-it note stuck to it, with the kind of not entirely transparent sticky tape that Abby's grandma used to own. It said, "Do not use. Zaps." Abbey raised her eyebrows and looked at the alternative appliances. There was a kettle, next to which, for some reason, was a can of beans. "I hope that's not intended to be for our breakfast," she remarked. Shen leaned over and picked up a note from the countertop. "The kettle switch likes to click off before water is boiled. If this happens, use beans to hold down switch. Please refrain from consuming these beans for this reason." "Oh, come on," snapped Abbey. "That's a temporary solution, not one to leave for other people to use." Ned put some water in the kettle and tested the system. "Well," he said, "it works. Cuppa?" The cupboards turned out to be very well stocked with hot drinks provisions, which satisfied Pan immediately, despite the fact that the milk provided was long life, and Ned couldn't find the switch to turn on the small fridge. After some time of standing right beside it, Abbey discovered a dainty piece of blue writing paper with some further instructions. "These complicated tiles make it really hard to see things," she complained. Her complaints worsened when she read the contents of the note, which included, "To turn fridge on, use the wooden meter ruler you will find under the sink. The power point for the fridge is right behind it and can be pushed to the on position using the ruler if you stand on the sink side." "What's so hard about getting an electrician to shift the power point a little bit?" Abbey ranted. No one was really listening, though. Pan had found a teapot with a crack in it that she was convinced was haunted. Ned had spotted the wood pile and darted outside to try to set up the pizza oven. Shen was sorting her clothes onto the bed in one of the bedrooms, and Bess and Grease were chasing each other up and down the hallway, getting under everyone's feet. Abbey sighed crossly and set about finding a suitable bowl and spoon to mix some pizza dough. Pan had wandered outside and sat down on the little garden wall to inspect the teapot more closely. After a few minutes, a magpie descended and landed a few feet from her. "Oh, hello," Pan said to it, smiling. The magpie looked at her and started to sing its warbling song. Moments later, 4 more magpies landed around Pan, and then these were joined by yet further comrades. Pan spread her hands, delighted, the teapot set aside. "Look," she called to the others, "I'm a bird whisperer." Abbey, who had seen all this occur through the kitchen window, was unconvinced. She opened the small window above the sink a crack so she could call out, "Pretty sure they want food." Pan looked between the birds. "Is that right? Are you hungry, birdies?" The magpies let out a chorus of warbles. Pan looked up at Abbey. "Did you say you brought ham?" "There goes my ham and pineapple pizza," Abbey complained, as the last of the magpies snatched up bits of ham and flew up into the trees. "Ham and pineapple is a terrible pizza topping anyway," Pan declared. "They've just saved you from it." Bess shot out of the side door and began scratching up large clouds of dust, seeking any scraps her black and white flighted cousins had missed. "She doesn't seem very under the weather to me," Abbey muttered. "It seemed like a good idea at the time," muttered a contrite Pan later, as the 4 friends gazed at a very odd, hamless spread of potential pizza toppings. "Sardine and olive, anyone?" asked Abbey in mock cheerfulness. To their very great surprise, sardines, olives, cheese and baby spinach made a very satisfying and much praised pizza, and Ned was able to use the pizza oven successfully. Now just to survive the night, Abbey thought, as she made her way to the little bunk bed set up in the tiny second bedroom that she and Pan were to share. It struck Abbey upon entering the bedroom that there was something being hidden by the very lacy skirt that hung around the lower bunk. It was beautiful, but it made no sense to have such delicate-looking fabric where people would be taking off shoes, dumping bags, and generally stuffing things, especially if those people were kids or the kind of grown-up kids who were still prepared to sleep in bunks. She suspiciously turned the lace up over the thin mattress, and sure enough, the lace was a thin veil for hidden things. The space under the bunks was home to a tightly packed storage space, which was entirely filled with what looked like diaries, or at least some kind of books filled with handwritten notes. "Who on earth would leave all this here for strangers to find?" she muttered. Then she noticed the second reason for the disguise. One leg of the lower bunk had clearly at some point broken off. The circumstances under which this had happened, Abbey could not imagine. Rather than actually replacing the leg, or replacing the entire bunk, as a reasonable person intending to rent out their cottage might do, someone had instead seen fit to stick a large log of firewood under the relevant corner of the bunk and adjust the height by stuffing old newspaper bits underneath. For heaven's sake, Abbey shouted at the bunk. She wasn't sure why it made her so furious. In the night, the original builder's reasons for leaving the house became clear. Abbey was woken at 3 a.m. by Pan clambering down onto her bunk and hiding under her covers because of the howling wind. The little hollow around the building seemed to capture the wind, and it blew open the front door and cried its way down the narrow hallway, periodically slamming the door again as it retreated. When the wind stopped, the rain poured, and Grease woke everyone again by barking and racing up and down the hallway, which had flooded. Water bailed out and mopped up, at risk of redback disturbance. They all found themselves sitting back in the kitchen, brunching on what Abbey suspected was rather old cereal, and contemplating the remaining pizza choices for dinner. Pineapple and raisins, she proposed. Yuck, said Shen. If you want dessert, make a pancake, not a pizza. Pumpkin and rosemary? Pumpkin does not go on pizza, raged Ned. Tempers were not at their best after 5 a.m. mopping. They did, however, try both suggestions, and yet again, the results were surprising, though Ned and Shen both pretended to hate them. When they all finally tidied up and headed back to the car, Ned brought a large bit of stone from the collapsing decorative wall up to the front door and stuck a note under it which said, "Door opens and slams in high wind. Use rock." As they approached the car, a crowd of magpies descended and landed all over the vehicle. "I haven't got any more ham," Pan told them sorrowfully. "Are you sure there isn't anything they'd enjoy in your handbag, Pan?" Abbey suggested, noticing that it was still rather bulging. The magpies looked at the 4 humans expectantly. "I don't think so," sighed Pan, but she rifled through the bag anyway. After a few moments, her hand closed on something, and she pulled out a tin of tuna, an envelope, and a small bag of cat treats. "Oh, I didn't think I still had these." Birds of the warbling and clucking variety, and interested dog satisfied. Everyone clambered back into the car. Shen had offered to drive, so Pan hopped in the back with Abbey and opened the envelope she'd found in her bag. "Anything interesting?" Abbey inquired, watching Pan smile at it. "Sort of. It's a letter from my ex." "Aw, a love letter," Shen exclaimed, starting the engine. "How nostalgic." "No," Pan corrected. "It's from when we broke up." Abbey's brow furrowed. "What do you still have it for?" Pan shrugged and toyed with the envelope. "I have no idea." After a while, when they were driving back through the sheep fields, Pan carefully put the envelope back into her bag. As she did so, she seemed to notice something else. "Oops." She fumbled around a bit and drew out one of the leather-bound books that Abbey had seen underneath the bunks. Abbey gasped. "Pan, you can't steal a personal diary." Pan opened the book. "It's not a diary. I looked. They're stories. I was reading some this morning, and I guess I dropped it in my bag by accident since that's where I put everything. They have so many. I'm sure they won't notice anyway. If they were worried, they wouldn't leave them at a place like that. She leaned back in her seat and resumed reading. Abbey opened and closed her mouth in indignation a few times, but Shen and Ned were discussing the route home in the front, and no one came to her aid. Shen dropped Abbey home that evening in the dark, and came in for some tea and biscuits. Abbey unlocked her front door, pushed it open with her foot, put one hand on the bookcase, found the light switch spoon with the other, and turned on the light. Then she stood on the mop bucket to reach the high tea cupboard, and made them a pot of green tea. Before she placed the tea on the coffee table, Abbey reached underneath and checked on the symmetry of a pile of books, which was supporting a section of the wood which had cracked. She poured the tea and sat back to find Shen looking at her with folded arms. "Abbey," Shen scolded, "these," she indicated the light switch spoon, the mop bucket, and the book pile with a sweep of her hand, "are temporary solutions, not ones to leave until they get dangerous or other people have to use them." Abbey blinked. Shen was one to talk with all the odd systems at her house. "Well, they work, don't they?" Shen wore a put-on stern expression that Abbey realised was an obvious disguise for amusement. "Yes, but..." "Well," Abbey interrupted, with the air of someone very proud of a philosophy thought up seconds before, "one cannot judge the efficacy of a solution or the flavour of an unusual pizza topping until you've tried it yourself." And with that, she dismissed all concern about temporary solutions, turned away from Shen to look at the bookcase, and began to wonder if she could put a toothbrush holder on the door frame in which to hang the light switch spoon so that it was easier to find. That seemed like a very, very good idea just now.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Did you guys have a recognisable B&B thing in there somewhere? Because I saw you, Claire and Nick, look at each other about something or other. What did you?
It's like Bula.
Yeah. It's like two places we've been. One where the wind howled around everywhere. Another where we found a spider in a pot that we were about to use.
Yeah.
Places with character.
Places with character. And
I suspect lots of that story was based on a place we stayed in France, in the middle of nowhere, where we had no phone reception and we couldn't contact the owner, and we didn't know who he was.
Lloyd, do you have any requests before you go?
Inappropriate metal screaming.
Inappropriate metal screaming, okay.
Inappropriate
Metal screaming.
screaming. Screaming. Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Oh yeah, let's have a past its used by date one.
Oh, okay, yep.
Yeah.
Oh, prepping.
prepping, yeah.
That's what we're all doing right now. To avoid
Prepping
coronavirus.
ridiculous things.
Oh. Okay.
Over the top.
Over the top preparing for things.
Right, yep.
But on a side note, you should see our cupboards right now and our pantry.
Yeah.
Right, yeah,
But
okay.
we have 3 or 4 preppers, a can of chickpeas every shop, not like 3,000 things.
500 in one go, yeah.
If anybody needs rice, they can come here.
Yes.
We have a lot.
I've got an idea. Something to do with how when you're trying not to touch your face, you can't help but touch your face.
Oh, it's kind of the same same thing as like don't think of an elephant, isn't it? Like it's you're trying not to do something really hard. You just like keep thinking about the fact that you're trying not to do it, and then you want to do it. Yeah.
And we have one.
Yeah. And when I was a kid, Dad used to always just look at me and go, "Itchy nose," and immediately.
Oh. Yeah.
On a related note, we have one on aphantasia because I was trying to explain to someone how I have. And if you ask me to think of an elephant, I can think of one, but I can't see it.
No, you're just thinking like about an elephant, but not
you can't.
an image of an elephant. Something else about an elephant.
Yep.
Associated things to do with an elephant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
It's
just
really
not
interesting.
realizing that you can't do something everyone else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's sort of by extension, like those things that you don't realize are a thing. I mean, kind of like the experience lots of us who have glasses or contacts have had when we came out the optometrist the first time, and they hadn't really realized the level of detail other people see.
Yeah.
So, like, what trees have like individual leaves on them and stuff. Yeah.
Well, that's a good one. First glasses.
Yeah, that's a good one.
First, yeah.
I
That
think.
dress in the pocket.
Yeah, and the
Dresses
crossover
with
between
pockets.
the two continents would be a good one to do.
Yes.
Would be crossover for the two continents. Time would be keeping warm. How to
Keeping
keep
warm.
warm.
How to keep warm.
And that involves all level of things.
Yeah.
Stealing firewood,
Dresses
blankets,
Yeah.
all kinds of things. Very wide subject area.
Mm.
I
Okay.
think pot plant obsession.
Oh, why?
Well, there might be someone there that knows that one.
I like plants.
Yes.
I know lots of people who like plants, and we all just like look at each other's plants and go, "I want one of those."
In-group, you know what I mean? In-group allusions. So we make an allusion to something. So it's a bit like...
Sort of like the language thing, but when you're like referring back to another incident or whatever that like the people
So, for
in the
example,
group know about.
There's some previous Storytime allusions in the room.
Yeah.
Darling.
Nobody else would get them if they
I
hadn't.
might have to make your image the biggest for a minute so that myself and anyone watching the recording can try and see. Okay, I can see Jess the toy cat.
Yeah, she's in a suitcase.
She's in a suitcase, so right, yeah. I won't say what that is because
No. And then
what
Who
else?
is this?
That's not on the screen at the moment. Oh,
Oh,
cheese! You got some smelly cheese.
yeah. Oh, this,
Very good. Very good.
yeah.
We'll have to ask people to put in the comments what this story is that
Yes.
is being alluded to
Right.
in this
Is
in-group allusion.
a flag on it, an Irish flag on a TARDIS. There's been no stories with that in it, Andrew.
Maybe it's suggesting there should be.
There could be.
I like Scarlet.
We've got two. Oh, we got two.
Two. Another TARDIS.
It's got two TARDISes. There must be two doctors. Yeah, and the last thing should be postponement.
Postponement.
That's happening everywhere.
Cancellations. Cancellations and postponements.
Okay. Yeah. The other thing is that our April story time, it's a little bit late in April, is probably the closest we've got to like a spring equinox or Easter one.
Yeah.
So we can go for a bit of a springy theme in that. Although, obviously, all of you are going into autumn, in fact. So you can go autumnal
Yes.
instead. That might be. All right. Well, we've done very well. We've managed to get all of those requests in on the one cool. So that's really good.
Sarah, hang on, one thing. Sarah, I
Killer
think
cats as a thief.
What?
Killer cat.
Killer
Oh,
cat.
killer cats. Okay, like
Killer-
as in cats
killer
that
cat.
hunt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
What I was going to say, Sarah, is a lot of the streaming sites, because of the coronavirus, have taken off their caps, and that's what I suspect has happened and why this video is just running through.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, I was thinking this feels long. There's no time limit come
Yeah.
up. Right, so we've been given a free unlimited call. That's very exciting.
That's very kind of Zoom.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's all give Zoom a round of applause.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
We grew these.
Are these your own cherry tomatoes?
Woo!
Wow! Well
It was
done.
I should have Andrew while we're at it, because he's actually got technology to work for it.
Yeah, well done. Got sound and everything.
Sarah, write it down for your story. Personal best.
Or first time.
So Claire's done a produce personal
Yeah.
best and then technology personal best.
Yeah.